Hey guys, I wanted to do a video on some of the reports that I like to use pretty regularly in QuickBooks Online. So these are some of my favorite reports and some of the reports that I run a lot in a company when I'm analyzing a company. So obviously the most popular is going to be the profit and loss. And this is just going to tell you the income and expenses of the business, and you can make some changes here to customize it. You can change it to different dates. You can change it, you can compare it to a previous period or a different period, and there's a lot of things you can do with this. So usually I like to look at usually I'm analyzing the month that has already passed after I reconcile. So I'm just going to look at that real quick. Now, I like to use cash basis because that tells me how much income and expenses have actually been brought in and paid out in the company, whereas accrual basis would be income and expenses that the business has earned or incurred, but they have not necessarily received it in cash. So, for example, they could have some customer invoices that they've sent to customers that would show up under accrual basis, but they would only show up in cash basis if the customer had actually paid already. So just keep that in mind. So I'm looking at cash basis, and this report shows all their different income categories, so you can quickly see which income categories are making the most money for this company. And then of course expenses. This gives you a rundown of different expense categories and where they're spending their money. Now, if it were me and I was analyzing this company, I would probably drill down on this miscellaneous expense, just because I don't really like to keep things in miscellaneous categories. Just for tax reasons, I think it's better to have a solid category. So I would probably drill down and look into some of these expenses and maybe recategorize them. But otherwise, this looks good. It's just for 1 month. And then, of course, this is a sample company, so there's not a lot of data in here. So these are really small numbers. Your business numbers might look a lot different. And then another report that I really like to do, and I use this all the time, is a month by month report, because I like to see trends over the course of the year. So usually I'll have a customized report, this year to date, display columns by months, and then I will save that customization in my custom reports. And then that way, when I go into a company, especially my own companies, I can just click on that really quickly and get right to that report. And this will help me see how I'm doing throughout the year. And because this is January, it's not really giving us a lot of information. So I'm just going to click on last year, just so you can kind of get an idea of what it would look like. So this gives you an analysis or a view of every month of the year, and this can show you trends over time. Of course, this is a sample company, so you can see there's a lot of empty data here or empty space, but in a real company it would have more information. And this just helps me see how I'm doing or how the company's doing over the course of the year. So I really like that report. That's probably one of my favorites. And then another report that's pretty common, one of the main accounting reports, is a balance sheet. This is going to show you assets which are considered resources of the business, like checking accounts, inventory, receivables, assets like buildings, vehicles, things like that. So resources of the business, and then debts of the business, which would be in this liability section. So if you want a quick view of how much money you owe in debt, this is a good report to look at real quick. And then of course it shows you any equity, which is the owner's investment in the company. So that's a really good report. And then another report that I like to do is the aging receivables report. So this is going to tell you which customers owe money to the business and how long those invoices have been due. So it breaks it up into 30-day increments. of how long that bill has been due. So in this report, I would probably want to focus on some of these older bills that haven't been paid yet. So you've got this one from Red Rock Diner. I'd probably drill down to that and try to collect that, because the longer you go with a customer not paying, the more difficult it is to collect on that debt. So that's just something that I look at. And then this report gives me a good overview of who owes money and how long they've owed it. But then when I actually go to collect money, I would probably look at one of these reports, either the collections report or the open invoices report. And the reason why is because it gives me more of a detailed view of which invoices the customer owes, what the due date was, and how much. That way, when I call the customers, I've got this information on hand that I can, when I speak to them, I can say, oh, you owe this invoice, and I can have the invoice number ready, the amount ready, and so on, and it just makes it easier. Another good report is the income by customer summary. This is going to tell you how much money you've made from each individual customer. So I'm going to do all dates just because there's not a lot of data here to begin with. But you could do this for just the year, you could do it for last year, and so on. But it tells you how much income you've made from each customer. And then if you are tracking expenses per customer, those would show up here as well. If you do payroll in QuickBooks and you track your employees, track their time per customer, that's also going to show up here. Your payroll expense per customer is going to show up here. So I think that's a really good tool. If you use those features, you can use T-sheets, or you can just enter the time directly into QuickBooks to track the time that employees are spending on each customer. And then when you run payroll, it automatically brings that information into this report. So this is a good report. You can see here Cool Cars seems to be their most profitable customer, and then they've got a customer in the negative. So if it were me, I'd probably look into that. And then of course Red Rock Diner hasn't paid their bill, so there's no income, but there are some expenses. So that's even more of a reason to go try to collect from this customer, because they've spent money related to this customer, but they haven't received anything yet. So that's really definitely someone to collect from. And there's another report in here that gives similar information. It's the profit and loss by customer. But this report I find is really big and cumbersome. Let me just show it to you. It puts it in columns side by side. So I would say if you're using this report, export it to Excel, and then that way you can work with it a little better. Because if this company isn't very big, but I've seen companies with an enormous report right here because they have a lot of different customers. So this report can get really big. So just kind of keep that in mind. That it's a good report, but I don't really like to use that particular one. And then another thing I like to do with the income by customer summary report is I also like to export this to Excel so that I can do more analysis, like, you know, percent of the business. You can actually do some of that stuff here. So I did a percent of the column, and it gives me what percentage of income or net income or net income, it's in two different columns, each customer is. So you can see that Cool Cars is 42% of their income. So this is a good tool to use, and you can export this to Excel and do more with it, but this gives you some really good information on what customers to focus on, and then what customers to maybe increase in some way. And then another report that I like to look at is the unpaid bills. This gives me any vendors that money is owed to. So this is a good tool to use to kind of keep an eye on who's owed money and maybe prioritize which bills need to be paid. And then if you have payroll, if you're using the payroll feature in QuickBooks Online, you'll have a lot more reports down here under payroll. And I use a lot of those reports as well. But this company file, this sample company, doesn't have any payroll. So I'm going to just skip that part. But basically, those are some of my common reports. And then I should also mention the general ledger. That's not really a report I use that often, but at year end, this is a good report that the CPA might want. And then it's also a good report to maybe export to Excel and look at a lot of transactions at once. This doesn't have a lot in it right now, but if I looked at, for example, last year, this could be a much bigger report, especially if you're a bigger company with a lot more transactions. And you can see it basically shows you everything that happened in the entire year. So it's a good tool if you're maybe looking for stuff. You can export it to Excel. A lot of times I'll export something to Excel if I'm looking for something, and I can use the find feature in Excel and find something a little quicker. So I hope that helps, and if you have any questions about any reports, please feel free to comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.